Hello everyone, now let us discuss about Good Manufacturing Practices Guide for Active Pharmaceutical Ingredients Part 7. This comes under Q7 Quality Guideline of ICH. Now coming to production and in-process control. Now coming to production operations. The raw materials for intermediate and API manufacturing should be weighed or measured under appropriate conditions so that they do not affect their suitability for use. Measuring devices should be suitable accuracy for the intended use. Should be of suitable accuracy for the intended use. If a material is subdivided for later use in production operations, the container receiving the material should be suitable and should be identified that the following information is available: material name and or item code, receiving or controlling number, weight or measure of material in the new container, re-evaluation or retest date if appropriate. Now, steps such as critical weighing, measuring, or subdividing operations should be witnessed or subjected to an equivalent control. Prior to use, production personnel should verify that materials are those specified in the batch record for the intended intermediate or API. Other critical activities should be witnessed or subjected to an equivalent control. Actual yields should be compared with expected yields at designated steps in the production process. Actual yields should be compared with the expected yields at the designated steps in the production process. Expected yields with appropriate ranges should be established based on the previous laboratory, pilot scale, or manufacturing data. And deviation in yield associated with critical process steps should be investigated to determine their impact on or the potential impact on the resulting quality of affected batches. Any deviation should be documented and explained. Any critical deviation should be investigated. The processing status of major units of equipment should be indicated either on the individual units or equipment or by appropriate documentation, computer control systems, or alternative means. Materials to be reprocessed or reworked should be appropriately controlled to prevent unauthorized use. Coming to time limits. If time limits are specified in the master production instruction, these time limits should be met to ensure the quality of intermediates or APIs. Deviation should be documented and evaluated. Time limits may be inappropriate when processing to a target value. For example, pH adjustment, hydrogenation, drying to predetermined specification. Because completion of reactions or process steps are determined by in-process sampling and testing. Intermediates held for further processing should be stored under appropriate conditions to ensure their suitability for use. Now coming to in-process sampling and controls. Written procedures should be established to monitor the progress and control the performance of processing steps that cause variability in the quality characteristics of intermediates and APIs. In-process controls and their acceptance criteria should be defined based on the information gained during the developmental stage or historical data. The acceptance criteria in type and extent of testing can depend on the nature of the intermediate or API being manufactured, the reaction or process step being conducted, and the degree to which the process introduces variability in the product quality. Less stringent in-process controls may be appropriate in early processing step, whereas tighter controls, this is important, tighter controls may be appropriate for later processing steps, for example, isolation and purification steps. Now, critical in-process controls or critical process monitoring includes the control points and methods should be stated in writing and approved by the quality unit. In-process controls may be performed by qualified production department personnel and the process adjustment without prior quality unit approval. In-process controls can be performed by qualified production department personnel and the process adjusted without prior quality unit approval. If the adjustments are made within pre-established limits approved by the quality units. If the adjustments are made within the pre-established limits, then production department personnel can perform the in-process controls without the approval of quality unit. All tests and results should be fully documented as a part of batch record. Written procedures should describe the sampling methods for in-process materials, intermediates, and APIs. Sampling plans and procedures should be based on scientifically sound sampling practices. Now, in-process sampling should be conducted using procedures designated to prevent contamination of the sampled material and other intermediates or APIs. Procedures should be established to ensure the integrity of samples after collection. Procedures should establish to ensure the integrity of samples. Out of specification, OSS investigations are not normally needed for in-process tests that are performed for the purpose of monitoring and or adjusting the process. Now coming to blending batches of intermediates or APIs. For the purpose of this document, blending is defined as a process of combining materials within the same specification to produce a homogeneous intermediate or API. In-process mixing of fractions from single batch. For example, collecting several centrifuge loads for a single centrifugation batch, or combining fractions from several batches for further processing is considered to be a part of production process and not considered as blending. As of now, blending is defined as a process of combining materials within the same specification to produce a homogeneous intermediate or API. Out of specification batches should not be blended with other batches for the purpose of meeting specifications. And each batch incorporated into the blend should have been manufactured using an established process, and process should be individually tested and found to meet the appropriate specifications prior to blending. Now, blending batches of intermediates or APA. Acceptance blending operations should include but not limited to. Acceptable blending operations should include but are not limited to blending of small batches to increase the batch size, blending of tailorings, for example, relatively small quantities of isolated materials from batches of same intermediates or API to form a single batch. Blending process should be adequately controlled and documented, and the blended batch should be tested for conformance to established specifications where appropriate. The batch record of blending process should allow the traceability back to the individual batches that makes up the blend. When physical attributes of the API are critical, for example, API intended to use in solid dosage forms or suspensions, blending operation should be validated to show homogeneity of the combined batch. Validation should include testing of critical attributes, for example, particle size distribution, bulk density, and tab density that may affect the blending process. If the blending could adversely affect stability, stability testing of the final blended batches should also be performed. Expiry or retest date of the blended batch should be based on the manufacturing date of the oldest tailing or batch in the blend. Coming to contamination control, residual materials can be carried over into successive batches of the same intermediate or API if there is adequate control. Examples include residue adhering to the wall of micronizer, residual layer of damp crystals remaining in centrifuge bowl after discharge, incomplete discharge of fluids or crystals from a processing vessel upon transfer of the material to the next step of the process. So, such carryover should not result in the carryover of degradants or microbial contamination that may adversely alter the established API impurity profile. Production operations should be conducted in a manner that will prevent contamination of intermediates or APIs by other materials. And precautions to avoid contamination should be taken when API are handled after purification. Coming to packaging and identification labeling of APIs and intermediates. In general, there should be written procedures describing the receipt identification, quarantine, sampling, examination or testing and release, and handling of packaging and labeling material. Packaging and labeling material should conform to established specifications. Those that do not comply with such specifications should be rejected to prevent their use in the operations for which they are unsuitable. Record should be maintained for each shipment of labels and packaging materials showing receipt, examination or testing or whether accepted or rejected. Containers should provide adequate protection against derogation or contamination of the intermediate or API that may occur during transportation and recommended storage. Containers should be clean and, where indicated by the nature of the intermediate or API, sanitized to ensure that they are suitable for their intended use. These containers should not be reactive, additive or absorptive so that they alter the quality of the intermediate or API beyond the specified limit. If containers are reused, they should be cleaned in accordance with documented procedures and all previous labels should be removed or defaced. Coming to label issuer and control. Access to label storage area should be limited to authorized personnel. Procedure should be used to reconcile the quantities of labels issued, used and returned and to evaluate discrepancies found between the number of containers labeled and the number of labels issued. Such discrepancies should be investigated and the investigation should be approved by quality unit. All excess labels bearing batch numbers or batch related printing should be destroyed. Returned labels should be maintained and stored in a manner that prevents mix-ups and provides proper identification. Absolute and outdated labels should be destroyed. Printing devices used to print labels for packaging operations should be controlled to ensure that all imprinting conforms to the print specified in the batch production record. Printed labels issued for a batch should be carefully examined for proper identity and conformity to specifications in the master production record. The results of this examination should be documented. A printed label representative of those used should be included in the batch production record. Packaging and labeling operations. These should be documented There should be documented procedure designated to ensure the correct packaging materials and labels are used. And labeling operations should be designed to prevent mix-ups. There should be physical or spatial separation from operations involving other intermediates or APIs. Labels used on containers of intermediates or APIs should indicate the name or identifying code, batch number of the product, storage conditions, when such information is critical to assure the quality of the intermediate or API. The intermediates or API is intended to transferred outside the control of the manufacturer's material management system. The name and address of the manufacturer, quality of the contents and specific transport conditions and any specific legal requirements should also be included on the label. For example, intermediates or APIs with an expiry date should be indicated on the label and certificate of analysis. For intermediates or APIs with a retest date, the retest date should be indicated on the label and or certificate of analysis. Packaging and labeling facilities should be inspected immediately before use to ensure that all materials not needed for the next packaging operations have been removed. The packaging and labeling facilities should be inspected immediately before the use to ensure that all materials that are not needed for the next packaging operations have been removed. And this examination should be documented in the batch production records, facility log or other documentation system. Packed and labeled intermediates or APIs should be examined to ensure that containers and packages in the batch have the correct label. This examination should be a part of packaging operation. Results of these examinations should be recorded in the batch production or control records. Intermediates or API containers that are transported outside the manufacturer's control should be sealed in a manner such that the seal is breached or missing. If the seal is breached or missing, receipt will be altered to the possibility that contents may have been altered. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for further videos on pharmaceutical sciences and other related disciplines.